in the vast tapestry of American history, woven with triumph, turmoil, conflict, and rebirth, there exists a single night so heavy with fear, whispers, and unspoken truths that it nearly shifted the course of an entire nation. And yet, for decades, it remained buried under the dust of forgotten archives and political shadows. The year was 1919, a year balancing uneasily between the relief of the Great War's end and the haunting uncertainty of a world struggling to rebuild its identity. And within the United States, citizens celebrated peace while simultaneously drowning in invisible waves of suspicion. Because every street corner echoed rumors of revolution. Every newspaper headline screamed warnings of anarchists, radicals, and unknown enemies hiding in plain sight. And in that trembling atmosphere behind the polished doors of Washington and the echoing corridors of power, a classified operation slowly began to form Operation Silent. NITA mission that would initiate a chain reaction shaping the next century of American intelligence security, freedom, and fear. Deep inside a dimly lit government building where the smell of ink, burnt paper, and typewriter grease lingered endlessly. A group of tense officials gathered around a table littered with bomb fragments, anonymous letters, and frantic reports pouring in from major cities. And at the center of this storm stood a young man, only 24 years old. Sharp-eyed and relentlessly ambitious, named J. Edgar Hoover, who would later become one of the most powerful and controversial figures in American history. But on that night, he was simply a determined bureaucrat trying to stitch order into chaos as the country teetered on the edge. But outside the Capitol, fear traveled faster than the telegraph cities were rattled by sudden explosions. Political leaders received mysterious packages filled with dynamite. Front porches of the nation's most influential figures were shattered in the blink of an eye. And newspapers like the Washington Post and the New York Times printed alarming headlines such as "America under attack" and "Red menace at the door," feeding a terrified population searching desperately for villains or explanations. But the truth was far more complex. Because the bombs were neither random nor chaotic, they were coordinated. Precise warnings sent by unknown hands, hands that wanted to strike fear into the heart of American democracy. And so, under this storm of panic, Hoover proposed something unprecedented, assembling a secret investigatory unit, a small but fiercely committed team that would operate outside public knowledge, outside conventional rules, outside the slow-moving machinery of traditional law, because Hoover believed that America was at war, and in war, he insisted hesitation meant destruction. Thus, Operation Silent Night was born. A covert mission to identify the architects behind the bombings and to prevent future attacks. But the methods Hoover introduced would soon stretch beyond surveillance and into uncharted ethical territory, planting the seeds of the modern intelligence state. As night fell on June 2, 1919, the nation's simmering fear erupted into full chaos when 9 coordinated bombs detonated almost simultaneously across different American cities, tearing through quiet streets, shattering windows and public confidence, and throwing the country into a darkness deeper than any physical explosion could create. And among the victims was Attorney General A. Mitchell Palmer's home, which was violently blown apart, sending debris across the neighborhood and shaking Washington to its core. And that specific blast, aimed directly at a top government figure, marked a point of no return, because now the government felt personally targeted, violated, and cornered, igniting a fire that would burn into every legal decision of the coming months. After the explosions, crowds gathered on smoky streets lit by the orange glow of burning debris, some crying, others shouting, many frozen in stunned silence as firemen struggled to control the scattered infernos. And above all the chaos hung a single question: who was behind this? But answers were scarce, clues were minimal, and fear began boiling into anger, suspicion, and a demand for drastic action. Hoover, racing against time, shut himself inside a cramped office overflowing with telegraph lines, codebooks, and piles of classified notes, and with an intensity that startled even his colleagues. He began assembling lists of suspected radicals, political dissidents, immigrants, labor organizers, anyone whose ideas clashed with the fragile peace America believed it had earned after the war. And while his intentions were wrapped in the banner of national security, the methods he authorized: wiretapping without warrants, mass interception of mail, undercover infiltration of community groups, began quietly rewriting the boundaries of American freedom. Meanwhile, the public remained unaware of the true extent of Operation Silent Night, believing only that the government was handling the threat, but inside that basement office, Hoover was engineering a system of surveillance and political policing unlike anything the nation had seen. A system built not on transparency but on fear, secrecy, and the conviction that extraordinary times justify extraordinary measures. The night of the bombings soon became known among insiders as the night America stood still, because for the first time, the country's leaders truly believed they might be losing control. And that fear drove Hoover to double down, designing large-scale raids, recommending mass detentions, and urging officials to bypass the slow constraints of due process, all under the guise of preventing the next explosion. Across the country, Americans locked their doors tighter, politicians whispered behind closed doors, and newspapers printed every rumor they could find, stoking an atmosphere where truth and fear intermingled until they became indistinguishable. And in this tension, Hoover found both his calling and his power, a power that would eventually define nearly 50 years of American intelligence operations. But buried beneath this rising machine of surveillance was a single metal file stamped "Confidential" in red ink and sealed inside a locked cabinet deep in the Department of Justice, that contained the real truth about the events leading to the June 2nd bombings. The hidden correspondences, the forewarnings that officials ignored, and the political motives more complicated than the public ever knew. A file that even today remains a puzzle of rumors and selective leaks. But its contents hold the key to understanding not just that night, but the birth of an era where national security and civil liberties collided head-on. That file, untouched for decades, is where our story turns next. Because understanding what lies inside it means understanding how America transformed from a wounded post-war nation into a global intelligence titan. And so, as the smoke of 1919 settles into memory and the nation drifts toward a new decade of uncertainty, you must follow me deeper into the shadows, into the pages of that forgotten file, because hidden within it is a secret, large enough to rewrite everything you think you know about the moment America almost broke, and everything that came after. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to my channel for more stories like this. I'll see you again in another new video. Until then, take care, stay healthy, and stay safe. Wishing you all the best. Goodbye for now, and thank you. In the summer of 1919, while America trembled beneath the weight of unseen forces, the city of Washington carried an unease that clung to its streets like the humid night air. Nothing felt steady, nothing felt safe. What people did not realize, at least not yet, was that the explosions were not the climax of chaos, but merely the beginning of a much darker, more intricate unraveling. Beneath the routine clatter of streetcars, beneath the chatter of merchants and the clinking of cafe glasses, an invisible tension seemed to pulse like a heartbeat beneath the soil. It was as if the earth itself was warning the nation that something had been set in motion, something that would not stop, not slow, not rest, until the truth beneath the truth surfaced like a long-buried corpse rising for air. Weeks after the June bombings, a strange pattern began to emerge across major American cities, though almost no one recognized it at the time. Reports drifted into Washington in small, fragmented pieces. A factory in Pittsburgh mysteriously burned before dawn. A train carrying munitions derailed under circumstances that witnesses could never fully explain. A ship in Boston exploded in the harbor, killing 6 and rattling buildings along the waterfront. None of these incidents made national headline news. They were quietly buried under layers of bureaucratic caution, labeled accidents or unfortunate mechanical failures, because no official wanted to admit that the nation might be under a coordinated attack. To admit that would mean acknowledging that the explosions of June were not isolated acts of terrorism, but a precursor to something wider, deeper, more sinister. Hoover, still young but already consumed by the need for precision and order, moved through the corridors like a walking storm of determination. His colleagues whispered that he barely slept, barely ate, barely spoke except in clipped instructions that carried more weight than the orders of men twice his age. He had become obsessed with the unknown enemy he believed was operating inside American enemy without borders, without faces, without mercy. To Hoover, this enemy was not simply a group of radicals or anarchists. It was a philosophy, a contagion, a quiet tide of ideas capable of destabilizing the nation from within. And if he did not choke that tide before it flooded every street, he believed America's democratic foundations would crumble, but hidden deep inside a basement room bare concrete walls, a single flickering bulb, filing cabinets packed tighter than coffins, Hoover created his own war room. Maps covered the walls, marked with red pins and black strings, connecting cities like blood vessels feeding a diseased heart. Letters seized from raids lay scattered across desks, handwritten in frantic strokes, coded in ways that even the most experienced linguists struggled to decipher. Names appeared and disappeared in these notes, figures who seemed to exist in the shadows of multiple cities at once, drifting from one labor strike to another, from political rallies to underground meetings that shifted locations every night. They were men and women without fixed lives, without predictable patterns, without official documents. The Bureau labeled them transients, but Hoover gave them another name: the walkers without histories. These walkers moved like ghosts across the American landscape, speaking little, leaving almost no traces, yet somehow always present at the edges of unrest. Hoover believed quietly, fiercely, that they were the connective tissue between the bombings and the strange incidents that had followed. But the more he tried to track them, the more he realized that someone had erased their footprints before he could even begin mapping their movements. Police records vanished, birth certificates dissolved into clerical errors. Witnesses remembered nothing. It was as if the walkers were not simply avoiding detection, they were being protected by something larger, something organized. At the same time, a restlessness began to spread among ordinary Americans. Newspapers continued to drip fear into the public consciousness, igniting suspicion between neighbors. Immigrants were watched with tightened eyes. Anyone with an accent, a pamphlet, or even a book considered radical risked sudden interrogation. Some households began receiving envelopes in the mail blank. Except for a single sheet of paper folded twice, stamped with an unfamiliar symbol, a circle drawn around a vertical line that ended in a sharp downward point. It was not a known political emblem, not associated with any group in the United States, and yet dozens of such letters surfaced in different states. Officials dismissed them as hoaxes. Hoover, however, kept each one in a small locked drawer, convinced that these crude symbols were somehow connected to the deeper network he could almost see forming behind the fog of panic. As the summer turned to autumn, the rhythm of fear shifted. Explosions became less frequent, but strange disappearances increased. A journalist in New York, who claimed to be on the verge of exposing something larger than any anarchist raid, vanished without a trace. His typewriter was found still warm in his apartment, a sheet of paper caught inside the roller, inked with only 3 words: the silent ones. A dock worker in Baltimore, who overheard a conversation between 3 unknown men speaking in hushed tones about another strike coming soon, never returned from his night shift. Police found his hat floating near a pier ladder, but nothing else. And in Chicago, an entire meeting of labor organizers dispersed suddenly when an unfamiliar figure entered the room, tall, wearing a thick coat despite the heat, his face half hidden under a wide hat brim. Witnesses later described feeling an indescribable chill the moment he stepped inside, as if the air itself had darkened. By the time police arrived, the man was gone, and none of the organizers could agree on what he looked like. Some insisted he had no facial features at all. Back in Washington, Hoover felt the pressure of the nation closing around him like a tightening fist. Every failure, every missing lead, every vanishing witness pushed him deeper into a state bordering on obsession. His notebooks filled with lists of names, crossed out, rewritten, circled. His desk became a graveyard of unanswered questions. Yet there was one document that continued to haunt him more than the rest: a telegram intercepted from a ship traveling from Europe, dated April 1919, long before the June bombings. It contained only a handful of cryptic phrases: movement, proceeding, New World operation, silent resurgence, and at the bottom, the same symbol found on the blank envelopes, the circle with the downward point. Hoover studied that symbol late into the night, convinced it held the key to understanding everything. But no historian, no linguist, no intelligence contact could trace its origins. It was as if the symbol had appeared from nowhere, carried across continents by invisible hands. And yet, Hoover could not shake the feeling that he had seen it somewhere before, long before this case, long before his work at the Department of Justice. Somewhere in a forgotten book, an old pamphlet, perhaps a photograph. But the memory remained just out of reach, like a word sitting on the tip of his tongue. Meanwhile, powerful men in Washington began to grow uneasy, not because of the walkers or the explosions or the symbols, but because Hoover was becoming too effective. His influence expanded. His network of informants grew. Even without a title, he operated like a force of nature, gathering more authority than older officials who expected him to remain a quiet clerk. But Hoover was no longer a clerk. In the shadows of Operation Silent Night, he was becoming something else: the architect of a new form of American power, built on secrecy, surveillance, and the belief that danger could be anywhere and, therefore, everyone must be watched. Yet, even as Hoover constructed this emerging intelligence machine, something slipped past him, something subtle, something human. He assumed the walkers without histories were driven by ideology, foreign influence, political extremism. But the more the investigation grew, the more it became clear that many of them were not radicals at all. Some were ordinary citizens forced into silence by threats. Some were immigrants terrified of deportation. Some were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. The true masterminds remained hidden behind layers of these expendable figures, using them like chess pieces that could be sacrificed without consequence. And then, in late October, an unexpected piece of evidence arrived at Hoover's desk, delivered anonymously, left in a plain envelope on the floor outside his office. Inside was a single photograph, grainy and aged, showing a group of men standing in a dimly lit cellar, surrounding a wooden crate. Their faces were shadowed, blurred, but three details were unmistakable. The crate bore the same circle landline symbol. The men wore heavy coats, similar to the Chicago figure, and on the back of the photograph, written in small, nearly invisible ink, were the words, "They arrived before the war." Hoover froze. Because those words suggested something he had never considered. Something far more dangerous. This was not the work of anarchists reacting to American politics. This was not a spontaneous uprising. This was not even about the Great War or its aftermath. This was a plan that began years earlier. A movement already embedded in American soil long before the first explosion. A movement that had prepared, organized, infiltrated, and waited for the night America would stand still. And now, as Hoover stared at that fading photograph, the weight of this revelation pressed against his chest like a stone. For the first time, he realized that Operation Silent Night was not about stopping a sequence of attacks. It was about confronting something older, something with deeper roots, something that believed America was not a nation to destroy, but a landscape to reshape. And somewhere, hidden in the labyrinth of clues, whispered testimonies, and ghost-like figures drifting through cities, the truth waited silent, patient, alive. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to my channel for more stories like this. I'll see you again in another new video. Until then, take care, stay healthy, and stay safe. Wishing you all the best. Goodbye for now, and thank you.